We like to think we're the ones calling the shots, right? Making our own choices. But you ever get the feeling something else is going on, like there are these unseen forces kind of nudging us, or sometimes even straight up shoving us in certain directions?
Yeah, definitely. We're not always as in control as we think.
Exactly. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on some of those forces. We're diving deep into the world of incentives.
It's going to be like unlocking a secret code to understand not just why we do the things we do, but why everyone around us acts the way they do too.
So buckle up for this deep dive, folks. We're calling this one 7 Shocking Incentives That Secretly Shape Your Life. You won't believe #3.
Yeah, you really won't believe number 3.
So to tackle this, we've been digging through research, articles, and some pretty fascinating stories to understand what makes these incentives tick.
It's amazing how these often unseen forces, both big and small, really do influence so much of our lives. It's like there are these constant nudges or sometimes even shoves pushing us towards certain actions.
Totally. And some of what we found is really surprising.
Yeah, definitely some eye-openers in there.
So to give you a bit of a roadmap, we're going to break this down into 7 key areas.
Sounds good.
First up, we're tackling the most obvious one, the power of the purse. Economic incentives. It's all about how money, costs, and that potential for profit really drive us.
The classic carrots and sticks.
Exactly. Then we'll move on to keeping up with the Joneses and avoiding the shame. Social incentives, like how our need to fit in or impress others shapes our choices.
That was huge.
Totally. Correct. Number 3, this is the big one. Doing the right thing, maybe. Moral incentives. This is where things get really interesting and maybe a little unexpected.
Yeah, that one might surprise a few people.
Then we're getting into the nitty-gritty with when good intentions go bad. The dark side of incentives. Cheating.
You always got to watch out for that.
No kidding. Then we'll explore the upper hand. Information as an incentive. It's all about the power of knowing or not knowing certain things.
Knowledge is power, right?
Right. And then we'll look at when things go sideways with, oops, unintended consequences of incentives. Sometimes these things backfire in ways you'd never expect.
Definitely happens more than you'd think.
And finally, we're diving into the cutthroat world of the Hunger Games of business, incentives in competitive fields.
Oh, yeah, that's where things get really intense.
So are you ready to jump in and see what really makes us tick?
Let's do it.
Okay, so first up, the power of the purse. Economic incentives.
Right to the heart of it.
Basically, we're talking about how money, the cost of things, and that chance of making a profit, how all of that acts as a motivator.
It's the oldest trick in the book, right? The classic system of rewards and punishments, but using money as the driving force. You do something good, you get a reward. You mess up, you pay the price.
So it's all about linking a financial outcome directly to, whether you do something right or wrong.
Exactly. And that can be incredibly effective.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like think about those taxes on cigarettes. They call them sin taxes.
Yeah.
By making them more expensive, it discourages people from buying them, at least in theory.
Definitely. And on a larger scale, economic incentives can be really useful for, allocating resources efficiently. Think about it. If a company knows they'll get slapped with a huge fine for polluting, they're going to be way more motivated to invest in cleaner technologies just from a purely financial standpoint.
Makes sense.
Plus, these kinds of incentives are usually pretty straightforward to measure, It's all about the numbers. That makes them easier to implement and track whether they're actually working.
So let's flip the script for a second. What happens when you don't use economic incentives in situations where, they might actually make sense?
Well, you run the risk of people just not doing the things you want them to do. A company might try to encourage employees to save energy, but without any real reward or consequence, it's probably not going to be top of mind for anyone.
It's easy to let those things slide if it doesn't hit your wallet directly.
Exactly. And you miss out on those potential gains too, Like we talked about, economic incentives can really boost efficiency.
Right.
And sometimes you need that financial push to break bad habits. Like offering rebates on energy-efficient appliances could convince people to finally upgrade that old energy-guzzling fridge.
So in the U.S., how are businesses actually using these economic tools strategically?
Oh, they're everywhere. Think about all those loyalty programs you see. Retailers use those point systems and special discounts to keep you coming back for more.
Oh, yeah. I'm definitely a sucker for a good loyalty program.
Aren't we all? It's a win-win, really. The customer gets a reward and the business gets repeat business.
Makes sense.
And like I said, energy companies offer rebates for buying energy-efficient appliances. It's a smart way to get people to choose the more eco-friendly option.
Yeah, it makes it less of a financial burden up front.
Exactly. And then there's insurance companies. They offer discounts for things like safe driving. Basically, they're rewarding you financially for being a responsible driver.
So what about the companies that aren't using these strategies? What kind of disadvantages are they putting themselves at?
Well, they're missing out on a lot of opportunities. Think about it. A retailer without a loyalty program,
Yeah.
they might lose customers to their competitors who do offer those tempting rewards.
Yeah, it's easy to get lured away by a good deal.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Same goes for appliance manufacturers. If they don't offer rebates on their energy-efficient models, they're going to have a tough time competing with those who do, even if their products are just as good.
Right.
And insurance companies, well, if they don't have a safe driving discount, responsible drivers might look elsewhere for better rates.
It makes them seem less competitive almost.
For sure.
Okay, so for our listeners who are thinking, all right, how do I use this in my business? What's the key takeaway here?
Well, the first thing is understanding your audience. What are their financial priorities? Whether they're customers or employees, you got to know what makes them tick, financially speaking.
All right, get into their heads a bit.
Yeah, exactly. And then you need to connect those financial motivations directly to the actions you want to encourage. Offer rewards, discounts, or cost savings that are clearly tied to those specific behaviors. And make sure the benefits are obvious and easy to understand.
Yeah, keep it simple, right?
Yes.
Like that classic buy 10 coffees, get one free punch card.
Exactly. Everyone gets that. It's clear, straightforward, and achievable.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to something maybe a little less tangible, but just as influential.
Yeah.
Social incentives. It's our number 2 on the list. Keeping up with the Joneses and avoiding the shame.
Oh, yeah, this one's a biggie. It all comes down to that basic human desire to be accepted, to be part of the group. And on the flip side, nobody wants to be the outcast, the one everyone's talking about for the wrong reasons.
So it's about playing to those social dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fear of disapproval, the desire for recognition.
Exactly. We're wired to care about what others think, whether we admit it or not. So social incentives tap into that by offering rewards for fitting in and potential consequences for standing out in a bad way.
It's almost like an unspoken set of rules, right? Like those social norms we all follow without even thinking about it.
Exactly. Think about it. Why do we wait in line? Why do we dress a certain way for certain occasions? It's because we've learned that these are the expected behaviors, and deviating from them can lead to, well, awkwardness or even social exclusion.
So what are some of the benefits of, I guess, intentionally using these social forces for good?
Oh, they can be incredibly powerful. Like, think about how social norms can help curb undesirable behavior.
Yeah.
Like, remember when smoking was allowed everywhere?
Oh, yeah.
It was on planes, in restaurants, offices, you name it. But then, as the health risks became clearer and attitudes shifted, suddenly smoking in public became taboo.
It became socially unacceptable.
Exactly. And that shift had a much bigger impact than any law or regulation could achieve on its own.
It created a powerful disincentive.
Totally. And social incentives can be great for building a sense of community, too.
Mm.
When everyone's on the same page about what's acceptable and what's not, it can really strengthen those social bonds.
It creates a shared set of values.
Right. And from a practical standpoint, they don't cost anything to implement. You know, you're not giving out bonuses or handing out fines. It's all about tapping into those pre-existing social dynamics.
Yeah, that makes them pretty appealing, especially for organizations on a budget.
Definitely.
So what happens if you ignore these social incentives? What are the potential downsides?
Well, the stuff you don't want to see might just keep happening. You know, if there are no social repercussions for bad behavior, people might not feel the need to change.
Like it doesn't even register as a problem.
Right. And you also miss out on opportunities to create those positive social norms we were talking about.
Yeah, to shape the culture you want to see.
Exactly. If you don't actively encourage the behaviors you want and discourage the ones you don't, you're missing out on a powerful tool. It can make it much harder to build the kind of environment and community you're aiming for.
So give us some real-world examples of how businesses are using these social incentives effectively.
Oh, there are tons. One big one is employee recognition programs. You know, publicly acknowledging and celebrating people's achievements.
Like Employee of the Month.
Exactly.
Right.
It taps into that desire for recognition from your peers and can really boost morale. And then you have brands that focus heavily on social responsibility. They'll highlight their efforts around sustainability, ethical sourcing, charitable giving, all that stuff.
Because people want to be associated with brands that align with their values.
Right. Consumers are becoming more and more aware, and they want to support companies that are doing good in the world.
So it becomes a way to attract customers.
For sure. And think about online platforms. All those likes, shares, and comments, they're basically social currency,
Much
right?
like a virtual pat on the back.
Totally. And those platforms know how powerful it is. That's why they're designed to encourage those interactions, because it keeps people engaged.
They're tapping into those deep-seated social needs.
Absolutely.
So what kind of mistakes are some companies making by not thinking about these social dynamics?
Well, if a company doesn't take the time to appreciate and acknowledge their employees, they might see morale plummet.
People want to feel valued.
Exactly. Especially by their peers and their bosses. And without that, you might see a drop in teamwork and productivity.
Makes sense.
And then there are brands that ignore social responsibility. They might face backlash from consumers who view them as unethical or out of touch.
Especially in today's climate.
Totally. People are voting with their wallets more and more. And then online platforms, if they don't create a space for social interaction and feedback, they might struggle to build a strong community.
Yeah, they become just another website, not a place where people want to spend time and connect with each other.
Exactly.
So how can businesses use this keeping up with the Joneses concept to their advantage?
It's about understanding the social landscape, both within your company and in your target market.
So you've got to know who you're dealing with.
Right. And then consciously foster a culture where the behaviors you want to see are praised and rewarded with social recognition. And subtly discourage the stuff you don't want, maybe through social cues.
Like a gentle nudge in the right direction.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to publicly celebrate successes, both individual and team accomplishments. Like, imagine a fitness studio with a member of the month board.
Oh, yeah.
It's a simple way to motivate people and create a sense of healthy competition within a supportive community.
It's using our inherent desire for recognition and belonging as a positive force.
Mm.
Okay, let's move on to number 3, the one we've been teasing a bit. Moral incentives doing the right thing. Maybe. This feels like it operates on a whole other level.
It does. Moral incentives tap into that inner voice we all have, that sense of right and wrong, our conscience. It's about appealing to people's desire to be good, to do what they believe is ethical and just, regardless of any external rewards or punishments.
So it's less about carrots and sticks and more about appealing to people's values.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that inherent desire to be a good person and to make choices that reflect that.
And what are the potential benefits of activating these moral drivers?
Well, for one thing, it can lead to really powerful intrinsic motivation. People are doing things because they genuinely believe it's the right thing to do, not because they're getting something out of it or avoiding punishment.
So the deeper level of motivation.
For sure. And that can lead to some pretty incredible outcomes. Like, you see campaigns that try to highlight the ethical implications of certain consumer choices.
Yeah.
Like, they might emphasize how buying certain products could indirectly support harmful practices or contribute to conflict.
So it's creating a moral disincentive.
Right. By appealing to people's conscience, they're hoping to sway their purchasing decisions.
And that can have a ripple effect.
It can. And moral incentives can be powerful in building trust, too, If people believe a company is acting ethically and is genuinely committed to doing good, they're more likely to trust that company and support its mission.
It creates a sense of shared purpose.
Definitely. And when these moral values are deeply ingrained in an organization's culture, it can lead to consistently ethical behavior. People aren't cutting corners or looking for loopholes. They're making decisions that align with their values and the values of the company.
So it becomes a driving force within the organization.
It can.
But what happens if you don't try to engage with these moral considerations? What's the risk there?
Well, people might be more inclined to prioritize their own self-interest, even if it means bending the rules or compromising their ethics, and that can create a slippery slope.
It becomes easier to justify those little compromises.
Exactly. And then you might miss out on building that strong values-driven culture we talked about.
Right, where everyone is on board with the ethical mission.
Yeah. And that can make your organization more susceptible to unethical conduct.
Which can lead to all sorts of problems.
No kidding. Legal issues, reputational damage, loss of trust, all of that.
So how are some companies in the U.S. leveraging these moral incentives in a positive way?
You see a lot of companies really emphasizing their mission and core values. They'll talk about how their work contributes to a greater good, whether it's sustainability, social justice, whatever it might be.
It's about showcasing their values.
Exactly. And that can be a powerful draw for both customers and employees who want to be part of something bigger than just making money.
Yeah, they want to feel good about where they work and what they buy.
Right. And some companies encourage whistleblowing. They create safe spaces for employees to report any wrongdoing they see, even if it involves higher-ups.
It's about promoting transparency and accountability.
Exactly. It shows that they value ethical conduct and are willing to take action against those who violate those standards.
And of course, nonprofits rely heavily on appeals to people's sense of compassion and moral responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. Their whole model is built around convincing people to donate to a cause they believe in.
So they have to make a strong moral case for their work.
Definitely.
Okay, so what mistakes are some companies making by overlooking this moral dimension?
Well, if a company comes across as only caring about profits, they might struggle to attract talent. People, especially younger generations, are looking for purpose in their work.
Right, they want to work for a company that aligns with their values.
Exactly. And it's the same with customers. If a company is perceived as solely profit-driven, people might be less inclined to support them.
So a purely profit-focused approach could actually backfire.
It could. And a company that doesn't have a strong ethical reporting culture, they might be completely blind to serious internal problems.
Yeah, they've got no way of knowing what's really going on.
Right. And that can lead to a whole host of issues down the road.
And for charities, if they don't clearly communicate their moral purpose and the impact of donations, they could struggle to attract support.
Definitely. People want to know that their money is actually making a difference.
So they need to make a strong moral case for their cause.
Absolutely.
Okay, so for businesses looking to build success the right way, how can they effectively use this principle of moral incentives?
It starts with defining and communicating your values. What do you stand for as a company? What kind of impact do you want to have on the world?
It's about going beyond just the bottom line.
Exactly. And once you have those values defined, you need to actually live them. Make sure your actions are aligned with your words.
Walk the walk, not just talk the talk.
Right. And highlight the positive impact you're making. Appeal to that desire in your stakeholders to be part of something meaningful.
Yeah. Show them how they can contribute to a greater good by supporting your company.
Like, think about a company that's selling sustainable products. They can highlight the environmental benefits, right? Appeal to the values of consumers who are concerned about the planet.
So it's a way to attract like-minded customers.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've looked at some of the positive intentions behind incentives, but now let's get a little darker. Number 4 on our list. When good intentions go bad. The dark side of incentives. Cheating.
Yeah, this is a big one to watch out for. Even with the best intentions, sometimes incentives can backfire and lead to unintended consequences.
Like that old saying, if a thing is worth having, it's worth cheating for.
Right. When the stakes are high and there's a reward dangling in front of you, it can be tempting to bend the rules or even break them completely to get ahead.
And why is it so important to be aware of this potential for, negative behavior?
Well, for starters, if you understand how people might try to cheat the system, you can design systems that are more robust and less vulnerable to manipulation.
So you're anticipating the potential for abuse.
Exactly. Like, think about all the scandals with standardized testing in schools.
Yeah.
Teachers feeling pressure to boost their students' scores, and some of them resorting to, well, unethical tactics to get those numbers up. If you understand those pressures and how they might lead to cheating, you can design better tests, better monitoring systems, all of that.
It's about closing the loopholes.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's not just about preventing cheating either. It's also about identifying and addressing it when it does happen.
Yeah, holding people accountable.
Right. And ultimately, it's about maintaining the integrity of the system, whether it's an education system, a financial system, a sports league, whatever it might be.
So what happens if you just ignore the possibility that people might try to game the system?
You're basically asking for trouble. Your systems become easy to exploit, the data becomes unreliable, and the whole purpose of the incentive is undermined.
It's like shooting yourself in the foot.
Pretty much. And if cheating becomes widespread, it erodes trust. People stop believing in the fairness of the system, and that can be really damaging.
So what are some ways that companies and institutions in the U.S. are trying to tackle this issue?
Well, you see a lot of organizations turning to technology to help them spot patterns that might indicate cheating.
Yeah.
Like in education, you have schools using statistical analysis to look for unusual trends in test scores, stuff that might not be immediately obvious to the human eye.
So they're looking for those red flags.
Exactly. And financial institutions, they invest heavily in auditing and compliance departments. Their job is to detect and prevent fraud, money laundering, all that shady stuff.
They're the watchdogs, basically.
Right. And in the world of sports, you've got technology like instant replay and Hawkeye being used to ensure fair play and make sure nobody's getting away with anything.
It's all about leveling the playing field.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the mistakes that happen when organizations don't take this issue seriously?
Well, a school district that's not closely monitoring its data might be totally unaware of widespread cheating.
Yeah, they're just going off those inflated numbers.
Right. And that gives them a completely inaccurate picture of how their students are actually performing.
It undermines the whole point of the testing.
Totally.
Yeah.
And a financial company with weak oversight, they could be bleeding money from fraud without even realizing it.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
And in sports, if there's a perception that the games aren't fair, fans will lose interest. The whole integrity of the sport is damaged.
So it undermines the legitimacy of the whole thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so if you're in business and you're thinking about designing incentives, how do you avoid accidentally encouraging the wrong kind of behavior?
Well, first off, you got to acknowledge that people are clever and they're always going to find ways to game the system if there's an incentive to do so.
So you have to be one step ahead.
Right. Don't just assume everyone's going to play by the rules. Implement those checks and balances we talked about, keep an eye on the data, and be prepared to adjust your approach if you start seeing any red flags.
So it's an ongoing process.
It is. And don't be afraid to build in some disincentives for cheating.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, for example, let's say you've got a sales commission structure. Don't just reward people based on the volume of sales. Factor in things like customer satisfaction, Make sure they're not just pushing products on people who don't need them.
So you're building in some ethical safeguards.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move on to our fifth incentive. And this one is particularly intriguing. The upper hand. Information as an incentive.
Yeah, this one's all about the power of knowledge, or rather, the power of knowing something that others don't.
So it's not a tangible reward like money or recognition. It's about information itself having value.
Right. And that value can be used in a lot of different ways, both positive and negative. Like, we came across this comparison between the KKK and real estate agents.
Wait, really? The KKK and real estate agents?
Yeah, it sounds weird, but hear me out.
Okay, I'm listening.
Both groups thrived, in a sense, by controlling information. The KKK used secrecy and fear to maintain their power, while real estate agents, at least historically, often had access to market information that buyers and sellers didn't.
So it's about having an informational advantage.
Exactly. And that can give you a lot of leverage. But the key is how you use it.
So what are some ethical and beneficial ways to leverage information?
Well, transparency is huge. Think about a real estate agent who openly shares data on comparable sales, market trends, all of that.
But not holding back.
Right. They're empowering their clients to make informed decisions. And that builds trust.
It creates a more level playing field.
Totally. And within a company, sharing information freely can help employees make better decisions. It avoids those bottlenecks where people are waiting on someone else to give them the information they need.
So it can streamline operations.
Definitely. And of course, having unique data and insights can give you a competitive edge in the marketplace. That's why companies invest so much in market research and data analysis.
It's about finding those hidden opportunities that others might miss.
Exactly.
So what are the downsides of abusing an informational advantage? What can go wrong there?
Well, it can quickly lead to exploitation. Think about situations where experts or professionals intentionally withhold information or present it in a way that benefits them, even if it's not in the best interest of the other party.
So it's about using your knowledge to manipulate people.
Right. And that's a breach of trust. It can also create huge inefficiencies.
Yeah.
Like, if people don't have access to the information they need, they can't make informed decisions. It can slow everything down and lead to poor outcomes.
It can be really frustrating for everyone involved.
Totally. And then, of course, there's the risk of damaging your reputation. If people find out you've been hiding information or using it unethically, it can be really hard to rebuild that trust.
Yeah. Once that trust is broken, it's hard to get it back.
For sure.
So give us some examples of companies that are using information in a positive and ethical way.
One good example is online travel agencies. The good ones, anyway. They provide comprehensive pricing information, make it easy to compare different options so you're not getting hit with hidden fees or surprises at checkout.
It's about empowering the consumer to make the best choice.
Exactly. And then you have financial advisors who take the time to explain their investment strategies clearly, disclose any potential conflicts of interest, all of that.
So they're being upfront and transparent with their clients.
Right. And real estate websites that offer detailed data on property values and market conditions.
It's about putting that information in the hands of buyers and sellers.
Exactly.
So what are some mistakes that companies make when it comes to information?
Well, some companies still try to get away with hiding fees or making it difficult to compare prices.
Oh yeah, that's always frustrating.
It is. And those companies are probably losing customers to their more transparent competitors.
People are savvy. They'll figure it out eventually.
Right. And financial advisors who are vague about their reasoning or potential conflicts of interest, they're likely to lose their clients' trust.
It's all about that transparency again.
Definitely. And real estate agents who withhold information about comparable sales just to pressure a client into making a quick decision, well, that's a short-sighted strategy.
Yeah, you might get that one sale, but you've probably lost that client for good.
Exactly.
Okay, so if you're running a business, how can you use this principle of information as an incentive to your advantage while staying ethical?
The key is to be upfront and honest with your customers and employees. Share the information they need to make informed decisions, even if it means revealing something that might not be entirely flattering.
So you're building trust by being open and transparent.
Right. And if you have unique insights or data, use it to provide real value, not to exploit people. Think about a car dealership that provides a detailed vehicle history report and fair pricing up front.
They're not trying to pull a fast one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're building trust and demonstrating their commitment to customer satisfaction. And that's a powerful incentive for people to do business with them.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to number 6, and this one is all about when things don't go quite as planned. Oops. Unintended consequences of incentives.
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting and sometimes a little messy.
Because human behavior can be unpredictable. You could design the perfect incentive, but people might respond in ways you never anticipated.
Exactly. The classic example of this is that Israeli daycare that started fining parents for picking up their kids late.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this one. What happened?
Well, they thought the fines would discourage lateness, right?
Yeah.
Make parents more mindful of the pickup time.
Seems logical enough.
Right. But instead, lateness actually increased
Wait, seriously, why?
because the fines shifted the dynamic. Before, parents felt a sense of obligation to be on time. It was a social contract with the daycare staff.
Right, it was about more than just the money.
Exactly. But once the fines were introduced, it became a purely transactional thing. Parents felt like they were paying for the extra time, so it was okay to be late.
So the incentive backfired.
Big time. And this kind of thing happens all the time, in all sorts of contexts.
So why is it so important to be mindful of these potential unintended consequences?
Because it forces you to be more thoughtful and cautious when you're designing incentives.
So you're not just charging ahead blindly.
Right. You have to think through all the possible scenarios, not just the outcome you're hoping for. And it also highlights the importance of testing things out on a smaller scale before rolling them out widely.
Like a pilot program.
Exactly. Try it out with a smaller group, see how they respond, gather feedback, and make adjustments before you implement it company-wide or whatever.
So you can catch those unintended consequences early on.
Right. And you also have to be flexible. Be willing to adapt your approach if you're seeing results you didn't expect.
So you're constantly monitoring and evaluating.
Exactly. And ultimately, thinking about unintended.
We like to think we're the ones calling the shots, right? Making our own choices. But you ever get the feeling something else is going on, like there are these unseen forces kind of nudging us, or sometimes even straight up shoving us in certain directions?
Yeah, definitely. We're not always as in control as we think.
Exactly. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on some of those forces. We're diving deep into the world of incentives.
It's going to be like unlocking a secret code to understand not just why we do the things we do, but why everyone around us acts the way they do too.
So buckle up for this deep dive, folks. We're calling this one 7 Shocking Incentives That Secretly Shape Your Life. You won't believe #3.
Yeah, you really won't believe number 3.
So to tackle this, we've been digging through research, articles, and some pretty fascinating stories to understand what makes these incentives tick.
It's amazing how these often unseen forces, both big and small, really do influence so much of our lives. It's like there are these constant nudges or sometimes even shoves pushing us towards certain actions.
Totally. And some of what we found is really surprising.
Yeah, definitely some eye-openers in there.
So to give you a bit of a roadmap, we're going to break this down into 7 key areas.
Sounds good.
First up, we're tackling the most obvious one, the power of the purse, economic incentives. It's all about how money, costs, and that potential for profit really drive us.
The classic carrots and sticks.
Exactly. Then we'll move on to keeping up with the Joneses and avoiding the shame. Social incentives, like how our need to fit in or impress others shapes our choices.
That was huge.
Totally. Correct. Number 3, this is the big one, doing the right thing, maybe. Moral incentives. This is where things get really interesting and maybe a little unexpected.
Yeah, that one might surprise a few people.
Then we're getting into the nitty-gritty with when good intentions go bad. The dark side of incentives, cheating.
You always got to watch out for that.
No kidding. Then we'll explore the upper hand, information as an incentive. It's all about the power of knowing or not knowing certain things.
Knowledge is power, right?
Right. And then we'll look at when things go sideways with, oops, unintended consequences of incentives.